Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. Today, we will be talking about all things document management and field collaboration, and I am really excited to jump into the conversation. And at the end of this one, we will be having a live Q&A, so make sure that you've got your questions on hand, and you can toss those in the chat at any time during the conversation. One of my peers will be capturing those for me to review at the very end, so we can ask our prestigious guests to jump in and share a little bit about their perspective and background, and we'll jump into all things construction. Before I introduce my very good friends, if you are a longtime listener to the show, please throw a comment in the chat saying hey, and let me know how long you've been listening or watching. And if you're a brand new listener, I'd also love to hear from you too. There's a lot of backlog on YouTube or any podcast player for you to catch up on. So if you enjoy what you see today, you should be able to go check all of that out. And I look forward to hearing your feedback on it. All right. So without any further ado, today's episode is Attack of the Mats. So our last live stream at the beginning of the year was 2 Mats. And today we have 2 more different Mats joining me today to talk about a lot of really cool stuff. I've got Matt Edwards, the Director of Digital Delivery at CRB, and Matt Poulos, the Electrical Engineering Manager at Gaylor Electric. So today, I didn't tell my guests this, but we're doing a 6-hour episode. So the questions are going to be long. We're going to be here all afternoon. No, I'm kidding. I'm just freaking them out a little bit. But gentlemen, how are you both doing today? I'm really excited that you're here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Definitely excited to talk technology in the built environment.
Yeah, we're gonna
absolutely thrilled to be here today. Thanks.
It's all good. And I had the pleasure of meeting Matt Edwards at Autodesk University just a few weeks ago. So it's always good to put a face to a name. And if you were at AU and actually saw some of our live podcasting, I'd love if you could throw a comment in the chat about that as well. Just curious who had a chance to jump in. But I'm going to stop rambling now because you didn't come here to hear from me. You came here to hear from my incredible guests. So Matt Poulos, I've got the first question I'm going to send your direction. Can you tell me, how do you make sure everybody has access to the right and relevant information out in the field and that information is accurate?
Okay, great question. So we are big fans of the Autodesk Build and Docs functions. So every one of our projects that we coordinate, and we use their own build site. So those are set up with our own templates that we have all agreed on. So every file structure is the same on every project. Every review process is basically the same. So when I create as a digital designer, create a document of some kind or a model, it goes through a review process that's similar on every project. Everyone has their chance to put their 2 cents in, make their comments, corrections, whatever it is. And then I'm the final QA/QC on that document. And we essentially publish it to Sheets and make it available to the team out there so they can see it on their mobile devices.
I love that. It sounds very intentional, which is kind of a swear word in my house in the sense that I say it so much on Digital Builder. But I think intent is really important when we're working, especially at scale as our teams continue to grow. Matt Edwards, I'd be curious if you have any other thoughts in how your teams handle, making sure people have that info and that it's, more importantly, accurate information.
Yeah, absolutely. Very similar, kind of echoing what Matt had just talked about. We have a standardized template and a folder structure, and we have a robust kind of quality program. They use it as a combination of Bluebeam Studio sessions along with ACC reviews, forms, and issues. And really, I just think in general, the evolution of this common data environment over the last several years in our industry has helped us execute projects tremendously. And I think having all project data and documentation structured in one place is key. And we've rolled out the Autodesk Construction Cloud recently in June. And it's been a game changer, going from previously where we had BIM 360 for our design and engineering workflows and then PlanGrid. as our field tool. So we had this siloed data between design and construction. So having one unified platform has been great with our field teams, our office, clients, trade partners, and vendors all in one place. It's been great.
Yeah, and it sounds like your team is being very deliberate as well. So it's cool to hear just how much things have changed in recent years, especially as the technology has become more, I think, impactful and more purpose built for the things that we're doing today. I mean, when I was still working for GCs, obviously I was more on the proposal side, but we didn't have anything that was made for us. It was all let's use other organizations or industries' tech and shove it into the boxes that are appropriate for the construction workflows, and that's changed, which tease up my next question. And I'm going to send this one to Matt Edwards as well. So, at what point in time do you start considering those new additions or changes to your tech stack, or changing your processes that you'll deploy to a new project?
Yeah, so I would say if you're trying to figure those things out on a project, it can be too late. Generally, we're thinking about that in the pursuit phase of a project. I'm typically working with a VDC regional manager as well as project leadership to kind of define our tech stack when responding to a proposal. We have our standard tech that we use for Revit for design authoring, ACC as our common data environment, but then we're making choices on maybe project-specific tech, things like virtual reality. Like, do we want to leverage VR for operability, maintainability, and constructability reviews? And that all depends on the complexity of the project, kind of owner preference and input, as well as reality capture is always a big thing, right? Like if we're doing a renovation project, we want to capture those existing conditions. So we're making decisions on like, okay, based on the complexity of this project, should we use a Matterport scan or do we need to do like a terrestrial laser scan? And then also documenting progress in the field and construction progression. Are we going to deploy something like OpenSpace or Doxel to help define work in place? So that's kind of how we take that approach on getting projects awarded. But then once we've been awarded those projects, then it turns to the bid process to our trade partners. And that's key. So we're using TradeTap to do a pre-qual. And we're doing kind of this extended pre-qual that takes into consideration technology. So we're asking questions about shop technology and capabilities, field technology, design and engineering capabilities, and we're putting like maybe a draft of our BIM execution plan with the tech stack outline. So again, we're learning more about technology before we even say go on the project. And then, of course, once we onboard our trade partners, then we're discussing that tech stack and finalizing it and getting buy-in.
Everything you just shared, especially on the proposal moment in time, I feel like we would have been good friends if if we'd been working together when I was still a proposal manager, back in yesteryear, because there's always so many opportunities to really deliberately offer betterments of, what we are offering our clients and customers, but being super deliberate about, just the broader intent about how we're bringing technology to the table, I think is great. Matt Poulos, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I mean, no,
Hopefully
that was
he
a
didn't
great
steal
answer
your,
Matt
he
gave
just
us. I really, no, I want to start a project with him just for that reason. No, the only thing I could maybe add, you did mention it, but just owner-specific needs, I think that's when we start really examining. But it really does all need to be done in the planning stage, at the beginning there. But some owners have, several projects that this is not their first rodeo type thing where they want things done a certain way, and we're more than happy to accommodate their needs and adjust our means and methods, if you want to call it, to accommodate theirs. Yeah.
And I love that you mentioned owners here too, because there's such an opportunity for owners, especially those that are serial builders or they're building projects time and time again. And I've received so many RFPs where I get it and I go, ooh, you copied and pasted that from a different project, or just weren't specific enough that allowed us to be on the nose to answer the mail for what that owner might have wanted. And I think it introduces challenges where it's harder for them to evaluate the proposals because they may not be apples to apples without that specificity. But also, I think it's an opportunity for them to really next level their technology choices and be very future focused. So like when you're thinking about what you want at the end of the day, that's a digital twin. You probably should be thinking about that in the proposal stage and building on it as, you build your relationship with whoever you choose for that project. I'll park myself there because I could talk about that for the next 25 minutes here. But Matt Poulos, you mentioned when we first met, a lot of passion tied to your teams working out in the field. And I'd like to lean into that a little bit and hear more about how you ensure that those tools and processes or new technology that you bring to the table are truly helpful for your field teams and not introducing a burden to their workflows.
Yeah, no, great question. That's obviously the last thing we want to do is make things harder. Um, the first thing I can say is that Gaylor's been a company around. We're going to be starting our 40th year next year, I think. So we've got a lot of experience, a lot of people that have tried a lot of things over the years, myself included. I spent about 17 years out in the field, so I know what things work, what things don't. But I've always been open to new ideas. So I think that's where we really start looking at our history, our catalog of successes, and really just build on that every year. We also talk to the field team. I mean, as soon as we send a piece of anything out into the field, that first piece of installation, that first implement of that product or tool, we want instant feedback. I mean, we will send somebody there from our innovation department to help with those first couple stages and see, get immediate instant feedback so we can make corrections and not force them to, if it's not working, we'll make those corrections. We'll pull it out until we figure it out. We definitely don't want to force something that doesn't work on our field for sure.
Yeah, there's a relationship there that is so important as you start to scale and bring new processes. And I think, as you very astutely pointed out, the field has so much wisdom to share, and it's really important to ensure that we're listening to that. And obviously, a construction company isn't necessarily a democracy, so you don't get like, everybody doesn't vote in the same way of bringing new tech in. But if you don't have that feedback loop, I think it's a big missed opportunity to ensure that your deployment is strong from day one. But also, I think it builds that trust and that relationship that's so important to convincing folks who might not be so sold on the new technology that you have their best interests in mind because you've been listening to the challenges they have and explaining why you're making those improvements. Matt Edwards, I'd be curious to hear how that compares or contrasts with how your team thinks about not being burdensome for your field teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Very similar to kind of echoing again what Matt was saying. We're involving our field team in evaluating and testing the new technology and making those decisions. And kind of that mantra of nail it before you scale it. And sometimes we realize some of the tech's just not mature enough to scale, but it's something like, hey, this is helpful, so let's keep going. Like something like augmented reality may be a good example of that, where it's maybe not ready to scale across our organization because we have a lot of complexity in life science facilities as well as F&B facilities where converting models and model drift is still an issue. But there's things of like, hey, maybe looking at the undergrounds before we pour or something like that, like just little ways that we can start to leverage it as the technology matures. And I think also with the ACC implementation we went through, we involved all aspects of our business from quality to design to construction, project management, from R&D through pilots, through writing processes. And I think that's one big kind of lessons learned or things to think about is define your processes and then see how technology, can enhance them rather than speed up bad processes. And I think maybe one last point on the field staff is it's really important that people understand the why. I think if people understand why we're doing something, they're willing to do things differently or understand something that's a burden initially, but there's something to gain on the other side of it. As an example, something like ACC assets, where we're creating a turnover package by using assets, it's going to make turnover way easier. So it's like, hey, might be a little bit difficult on your day job, but it's going to make turnover so much easier. So that's kind of how we approach it.
I really love that, and it's so deliberate and inclusive, where you're able to be inclusive as well. But we all know very well that any ability to save time in construction these days, especially with the scarce resourcing we often are presented with, is a big impact to the bottom line. Whether it's making sure that you're still on scheduled duration, or making sure that your teams get to go home at 5:30 instead of working 12-hour shifts and such. We've all put in those long hours, and it can be hard sometimes. And so I'm encouraged to hear that there's ways to use technology to impact and improve that. And you make me think back to a recent conversation I had with Sid Hacksar about eliminating RFIs on construction projects. And of course, that's a lofty goal, but a big nuance that his talk track includes is making sure that we're not automating waste. And that maps directly back to what you just shared as far as not putting the cart before the horse when you're implementing technology or processes. Obviously, automating a process is great, but if you have a wasteful process, do you really want to automate that, or do you want to find a way to eliminate the waste in that process as you do that? And so there's room to really step back and look at how we tackle, big challenges and problems for our industry. And I think it's an exciting moment because there's so many tools available. It's also kind of a stressful moment, let's be real, because there are so many tools available.
Yeah.
You have to decide what you're going to use. And that actually tees up my next question for you, Matt Edwards. How are you using BIM and 3D modeling when you're out in the field for collaboration, and what's the impact? I feel like the industry has finally started to really move to a point where the BIM modeling is useful not just in the office or the trailer, but somebody is walking out on the site. At least that's my opinion. I'd love to hear how your teams are considering that.
Yeah. So I think the best way to be able to leverage BIM in the field is to have early onboarding of our trade partners and have them involved in design. And, in best case, in that integrated project delivery scenario, right? So we're doing a lot of co-authoring in Revit with our trade partners with that goal of really eliminating that handoff, because those handoffs that we have just plagues our industry with rework and problems. And I think the best way it's been put that I've heard is Amy Marks, where my favorite quote from her is digital waste leads to physical waste, right? So, and that starts in design with our modeling. So I mentioned earlier how we had those early trade partner assessments where we're figuring out all the capabilities of our partners so we can figure out how to work better together. And then kind of the next step of that is a scope responsibility matrix. So we're getting together and figuring out the rules of engagement within the model, right? Where maybe in one particular example would be CRB may own the equipment and device locations, things like an air handling unit and HEPAs and diffusers. And then maybe we'll have some sizing criteria and airflow diagrams. But then we have our trade partners that are connecting the dots, essentially routing their fabrication level ductwork, and we're reducing that waste. And I think in general, kind of where we're shifting as an industry is to this constraint-based design approach of making design feel like the first 3 to 6 months of construction, where you have those trade partner fabrication releases. We're just pulling that into design. And again, authoring per sequence of construction, having model fabrication releases as we're designing, and having this kind of cultural shift of creating deliverables into this kind of assembling a building mindset, right? I think all of that is the framework that's necessary to move the industry forward with industrialized construction and kind of manufacturing informed design and all these other things that are picking up steam. And I think too, so that's talking about on projects, but I think outside of projects, to be able to achieve what I'm talking about, you also need to manage and have strategic partnerships with trade partners outside of projects. So I'm going to shops, I'm meeting with our partners, I'm looking at their tech stack, and we're figuring out how can we push the envelope and work better together on the next project. And I think maybe kind of a callback to your digital twin comment from earlier. That's what's really going to unlock the I in BIM, the information and building information modeling, right? So now we're able to kind of create this data thread in BIM, and then through ACC, and particularly in the assets module, where we're creating this data thread from the model, and then now through the assets module, we're tying in submittal data, RFI data, inspection forms, punch lists, all these data pieces that are crucial not only for turnover, but for implementing a digital twin. And I think then we become better data stewards of our owners' data. So yeah, I think all of that is kind of where the industry is shifting.
It's an exciting moment, to be honest, because there was kind of a promised vision for BIM when it came out that the technology didn't really answer the mail in enabling that. And obviously, I think some of our friends in Europe and Asia are a little ahead of us as far as BIM standardization and ensuring that that's kind of requirements for larger projects. But either way, the data is now there, and it really does start to inform our ability to make decisions, and not just decisions using that data too. And I had a really great learning moment at Autodesk University. Somebody shared something with me that I believe maps back to Jit-Kee Chin from Suffolk Construction. And we don't want to just make decisions based on the data alone, especially when we have superintendents with 25 or 30 years experience and all of these folks that really truly live and breathe our industry. But today, the data now allows us to be more certain in those decisions. It allows them to make them out in the field and make choices in a way that people might have felt like they're shooting from the hip and making a gut challenge or a gut decision in the moment. Now they can feel a lot more confident in it, especially if the data is accurate and correct, as we kind of jumped into at the start of this conversation. Matt Poulos, I'd be interested to hear if your team's had similar experience with a field based BIM modeling and in its application.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Matt pretty much described my what I do on a daily basis here. So,
He's stealing your thunder left and right today.
no, it's great. I know I live in Revit. I mean, I'm designing, modeling all day. I have a group of designers that are not that don't have that field experience. So I'm that bridge. I'm literally taking those people that can design and the people out in the field, and I'm taking all of their thoughts and ideas and helping merge them into a cohesive sort of model. So we spend a lot of time in Revit modeling. I spend a lot of time in Navisworks and in coordination meetings, and we're constantly adjusting and making making all of that flow together. Working with the field, though, that's where the tricky part comes in. I want their input. So I try to encourage them to give me some initial layouts, some initial designs that we can implement. It takes a little bit of pressure off of us. We're not guessing as much. We're like, okay, this is where he wants to put it. Let's model it there and show him what it looks like. So by having their input and the input from my people and me kind of being that glue in between, usually we've been quite successful with our designs lately. And I've got several projects going at once, but I don't need to be ultra detailed in every project. I can allow all those parties to give their input, and all I'm doing is being just a really good quality control for all of this here at this point.
It's a cool place to be as far as being that connecting thread from the field teams and that bigger picture, BIM focused team. And I appreciate the context you're sharing there, because it feels, especially as the industry continues to evolve, and this is teeing up our next couple questions tied to prefabrication, having somebody who really is able to connect those dots between what's happening back in the project trailer or back in the office and the design teams and what's actually happening out in the field becomes increasingly important, because there's a lot of complexity, especially with some of their bigger scale projects, or as you alluded to a moment ago, managing multiple projects at the same time. And being able to offer that certainty is going to be increasingly important. And so I want to tee up these prefab questions for you, and I'm curious to hear how your team tackles this. And I think we might have answered it a little bit with this last question, but how are you successfully deploying large scopes of prefabricated work and reducing the risk of rework tied to that prefab, or having things not line up as expected during your installation? Because I'm hearing a lot of very exciting and encouraging commentary on the value and use of prefab, and I feel like it's had kind of a hockey stick curve upward in the last 3 or 4 years. But I also hear some pushback where folks say, "Oh, the prefab, it never really lines up," or "Oh, yeah, they're back in the factory making whatever they want, and they show up and it doesn't fit." And so I'm curious to hear how you can do away with those myths and how your team make sure everything crosses the T's and dots the I's.
Yeah, I think all of what you said is correct. I think we are having great success. We are right now building a lot of things that we've been successful in the past. So we do a lot of underground conduit. We build what we call skids. Essentially, it's a frame around conduit. We've had great success with that. So we are going to keep rolling with that on every project. We're going to implement it anywhere we can. But typically what we do is we have just a kickoff meeting with every project. We get all the players involved and we run through an agenda. We run through, we do like a page turn essentially, and we start looking at all these opportunities that we could potentially do. So if we have a lot of conduit racks, we say, hey, this is a nice straight runs. Let's go with this. Do you have a lot of in-wall rough-in? Let's go with this. Cable tray, all these types of things that we see on every project, and we just look at it, be objective, and we are not afraid to say, I don't think this is going to work on this project. Let's not waste our time, And then once you get that sort of down, we start getting, like I said, the buy-in from everybody. I'll come up with, fabrication sheets, or if it is a coordinated project, I mean, Revit does a great job of really helping, create those shop drawings needed for fabrication. We have a whole separate department within our engineering that job is to sort of create those final fabrication sheets. So just past successes, and not afraid to look in the future. But one thing like I said, our building is literally called the Innovation Center. We are always looking for new ways to innovate. in any way possible. So just keep an open mind, keep moving forward, and you'll stay ahead of the game.
I really like that innovation mindset too, and I think it's a requirement today for our construction teams, especially as we continue marching forward with new tools and reimagining our workflows. One of you mentioned IPD, or integrated project delivery, a bit ago, and I'm bullish on that because I think it's one of those tools that we get to leverage that reduces the rework and increases our collaborative nature. But the communication has to be there, and the trust and the transparency, and so it takes a bit of work to kind of get the mindsets aligned sometimes, but it's an exciting moment in our industry as we have tools to facilitate these different workflows. And speaking of workflows, and thinking more specifically with prefabrication, what tools or workflows are allowing you to successfully manage that communication and share that information with your field and the prefab shop to do away with all of the stuff I shared a minute ago, the hesitations of things not lining up or fitting in the way that the factory had anticipated.
Oh, from our standpoint, I mean, it is still a challenge. I'm not going to lie; it's not perfected. Our shop is adjacent to our engineering department, so we are physically, close where we can go talk to each other. We do use all sorts of, we do use Autodesk for all of that. We use Smartsheet for linking sheets and pages and dates, things like that. It really is just the human side of all of this. You've got to be talking to each other. You've got to get input from each other. We can have all the tech in the world, but if we're not communicating with each other, we're never going to learn what's working and what's not. I still screw up drawings, occasionally. But I want to know about it immediately. I want to get it corrected immediately. I want to get it reissued immediately. So all that stuff, but it's still a challenge. I think we're all still really learning how to perfect it, but I see the progress. I see us getting better every day, every year. We're miles ahead of where we were 5 years ago, and I expect to be miles ahead of, from where we are now.
In what you're sharing right now, I think the core of that narrative it really just comes back to culture, both in a culture of being communicative and collaborative, but also not being a punitive culture. You mentioned a moment ago, and I appreciate you being candid. Like, we all make mistakes. We're all people. A messed up drawing, regardless of who made the contribution, that has a couple errors in it. As long as we're creating that culture of it being okay to point out a mistake, but also own it and correct it and learn from it, that changes the game and the narrative so much in our industry, where these deadlines are tight. These changes have to be implemented quickly. And if folks feel very comfortable jumping to the table right away and coming to leadership with a problem, whether the trade partner or somebody internally, it lets you tackle it a lot faster, but it also makes folks feel a whole lot better about the work that they're doing, and just knowing that you're there to support them, whether it's through a challenge or a problem, or trying something that's new and innovative to bring to the table. So it's a cool thing to hear about, and I appreciate the nuance and the challenge in getting there, because it's not easy. Let's be real. I mean, you have a $200 million project, and say the MEP is just super complex on that one. You're not going to be writing on the back of a napkin and sending it over to your buddy and saying, "Hey, man, so I think this is how we're going to prefab that." Like, you've got.
I'm still getting those, by the way. I'm still getting napkins.
We all are.
Well, now you can take a picture of it at least and digitize it so everybody gets to see the napkin.
Getting there, right?
And I think this kind of leads to my next question that I'd like to kick to you, Matt Edwards. As we think about this narrative of communication, we've talked about it a lot throughout this episode. When you're communicating and managing your project documentation really well, has it impacted your project team's wellness, their happiness levels? Do you see that touching your retention? Like, the mental health narrative in construction is starting to become more prevalent. I'm very thankful for it. And I'm curious if either of you have any thoughts on how this nuance impacts the teams outside of the broader communication conversation.
Yeah, so I think in general, IPD helps with a lot of that, right? Because now when you have everyone involved from the inception of a project, there's a sense of ownership. And you mentioned earlier, kind of trying to have no RFIs, right? Like that kind of concept. That's what IPD allows you to do. It doesn't become this person messed up. It becomes we messed up when there's a mistake, and things just get better because everyone has a sense of ownership of the entire project. starting with design, and then that collaboration kind of extends into the field, and it's just a better project experience. And like at the end of the day, we want our people, our trade partners, our clients, all to have a great experience on projects. And I think when that happens, kind of word spreads quickly there. And maybe some other kind of additional thoughts when we were talking about rework, I think as well, something like technology can help greatly with reducing rework with prefab. Things like site control and site connectivity, right? If you have those things established correctly, now you can establish site control not only in the field, but in the model. And now you're tying the digital to the physical. And you're enabling our trades now to do model-based field layout, leverage autonomous construction, things like HP Site Print and Dusty Robotics to kind of print the model on the slab. And then you've got reality capture, all these solutions where you can overlay the model with current site conditions. So you can kind of get ahead of a lot of that now. And then I think too, back to that IPD and that constraint-based design methodology, it's not just about the sequence being a constraint. It's what are the shop constraints and the shipping constraints of our partners, and how do we bake that into design? Because you're not going to fully design a facility and then figure out how to prefab it. You've got to bake that into design. So
it all makes sense. And Matt Poulos, I'd be curious to hear how that mirrors or contrasts against what your teams are seeing, and how just the impact of being deliberate here has impacted the overall wellness of your organizations.
Oh no, it's benefited greatly. It is a motto of ours to incorporate prefabrication in all our projects at some level. It can be tiny, it can be a small project. We still want to get a little bit in there because we know we have much more control in our shop over the manpower, the weather. Just those little things you don't even think about. Safety is such an important thing that we worry about. So if you can have a controlled environment, controlled manpower, controlled everything, you're going to produce a more quality product. You just have to go through the process and make sure it's worth doing. So through to the design, like I said, before we even start modeling anything, we kind of have an idea of what we're looking for from a prefabrication point. So as we're modeling, we're producing those sheets, those drawings. We are putting them up for reviews for everybody to look at, for them to approve, essentially. And then once everybody's happy with what the digital product is, then we can start implementing that fabrication. So we let our project managers start looking at material. We try to use certain materials, but sometimes those aren't available. So we have to make adjustments there. And you just sort of go through that whole process of how are we building this? What issues have we had before? How have we corrected them? And you're making sure you're not just repeating same old mistakes. And that, you're like I said, it's baby steps and a lot of them. And like I said, I think we're at a point now as a company where we have made enough of those mistakes in the past where we can actually produce a lot of great products.
I love hearing that. And for everybody out there listening, we've got a couple of more questions here. One of my favorites is going to be next, but I want to make sure that remember that we have a live Q&A coming up. So if you do have any questions for our team of Matts today, please throw those in the chat, and we will make sure to answer as many of them as we can. I've also got a couple of questions from the big room to ask as well. So for those of you big room participants, make sure you listen in, because you might hear your name come up in a minute. But all right, so I'm going to kick this final question to Matt Edwards first. I'm going to put you on the hot seat. What is one tool you'll always use on every project that you work on?
Mine would be the iPad, right? I think that's kind of revolutionized technology on a job site, right? And smart tablets and phones in general. But yeah, my iPad, I use it for notes, communication, ACC, obviously, when I'm on job sites, reality capture, using it as a training tool on site as well. So yeah, I can't live without my iPad, I guess.
I like it. And I'm grateful for the iPad simply because it was the catalyst for PlanGrid existing, which is a big reason why I'm sitting in front of all of you today. So I like that answer. Matt Poulos, how about you? What's one tool that you'll always carry to every project you're working on?
Oh boy. Now that I sit in front of a computer for most of the day, I pretty much just need my reading glasses, but I am a huge fan of all sorts of multi-tools. I've always had one since I was a green apprentice back in the day, working out in the field, but I am a big multi-tool fan, and figure if I've got that, I can pretty much do anything.
I like that. You're always prepared regardless of where you're at. So you get to, bring everything together. And, I think we're, we're all very much aligned today on our tool talk. So I appreciate you, giving a glimpse into something a little more personal outside of our bigger picture organization questions. So once again, if you've got any questions for us today, and we don't have a ton, it seems like everybody's mostly just agreeing with what we're saying, which is good to hear. Although if you disagree, I also want to hear about it, and we can have a conversation if we need to. But if you got any questions for our friends here, throw them in. You've got just a couple of minutes. But I want to start off with 2 questions from our big room friends. So first off, this one's coming from Ryan Gorman from St. Petersburg, Florida. And he wants to know, how much time do you spend training your field teams on digital technology? Matt Edwards, how about you give this one a go first? And then Matt Poulos, you can jump in.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of different approaches we take to that, depending on the complexity of the tool and how much of an impact it's going to have. But I think in general, we try to identify champions or SMEs or people who want to turn into SMEs, both like at a regional level and at a job site level, and really kind of train them and keep them updated on kind of how the technology is progressing and have them do some hand-holding. And I think in general, it's most effective when it's peer-to-peer, meaning that VDC, we can go out and do training a bunch to superintendents, but it's even more effective when a superintendent is training another superintendent on technology, right? Because it's someone that's walking in their shoes or has walked in their shoes. So there's just a more level of trust there. So we try to lean on peer-to-peer, as well as having our VDC staff either on site or visiting sites and doing the training.
Good. Ben Poulos, how about you?
Yeah. So we personally, I spend some time. Typically, it's to walk through the model on an iPad or something like that. But our company as a whole, we have just a ton of digital lessons plans that guys can use to look at, to navigate models, to navigate build, to navigate all the digital tools we have. We do also have educators that travel from job to job, and they might teach anything from how to bend conduit to how to navigate a model or how to navigate a project file or something like that. But I'm always open. I taught some apprentices for a couple of years, so I really enjoy teaching. So any opportunity, if I find anybody struggling with anything, I am always offering my services to spend a half an hour with them, peer to peer, like Matt mentioned, where I can show them how to navigate a model, how to find those files, how to find drawings or anything. But again, just being available I'm always there.
I love that, and it's such an important mindset to implement, and also there's another nuance to that in making sure that people know that you're available too. There's a big communication aspect that I think our leadership teams are really responsible for, in ensuring that folks know that if they have a question or a concern or a comment, that it's a safe environment to come and say, hey, I don't understand this, or hey, I consume information a little differently. Can we go over this in a different fashion or a new way? And also, I think also just saying, it's a safe place to bring problems to the table too, as we were talking about earlier. So it's a broader conversation that I could go on about for a while here too. But I appreciate that perspective. Let's see. Anybody have any final questions for us today? You guys might get off easy in contrast to prior LinkedIn Lives. You've all said, absolute brilliant things, it seems, because there's not a lot of questions coming.
I would offer to, if they say they could ask something slightly off topic, but I'm afraid.
No, that's a dangerous thing. You don't want to do that. Nah, just kidding here. But I do appreciate everybody joining us today. And, Matt and Matt's, now we've had 4 Matts on LinkedIn Lives here this year. I am very grateful for your time and sharing your perspective and wisdom with us today. Of course, I am Eric Thomas, the host of the Digital Builder Podcast. You can probably find my name if you'd like to follow me and hear some more of my brilliant utterances in the future, or keep track of future podcast episodes that are coming out. Otherwise, you can also find me on builder_digital on Twitter or X or whatever you call it these days. Also, again, we are a podcast. It's a video first podcast, so our entire backlog does show up on YouTube, but it also will show up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any of the major podcast players that you've got. And of course, if you are a longtime fan and follow us on our audio versions, I would be very grateful if you could take a moment to rate us 5 stars on whatever player you're using. It actually does make a big difference. You hear me talk about this a long time. I'm not doing it to fluff up my ego, but it actually does bump us up the charts and ensure that we get a bit more visibility on future episodes. And I would be forever grateful if you took a moment to do that. But aside from that, it looks like no final questions rolled in. So until next time, thanks again, everybody, and goodbye.